1 year ago. This is not a tutorial channel. Originally, this channel was created. I know. You win, right? This is a tutorial channel. And today, March 14, we are starting this new phase of the channel by teaching you everything you need to know to get started in Blender. That said, hello and welcome to the new season of Red House 3. My name is Ramon, and today I'm going to give you some general tips about using Blender. But first we need to specify what is meant to become familiar with Blender. If you're here, you already know that Blender is a 3D modeling tool that is extremely widespread in the market. However, Blender also includes video editing tools, 2D design, and among many other things. It's hard to find something that Blender doesn't do or doesn't do well. This is due to the fact that Blender has many add-ons and extensions that further improve its functionality. When you watch videos out there talking about Blender, they usually don't take into consideration teaching why you are actually doing things the way you are. And when they do explain it, they tend to limit themselves to talk about how those tools are being used in that specific project. So, in this video I'm going to show you ways to practice and learn techniques that eventually, through repetition, will become natural to you. Alright, now that we've defined what we're going to do in this video, let's get started. If you have any question about the keys or shortcut mentioned here, just look at the bottom right corner. To start, the first thing to do is delete the entire default scene, especially the cube. Seriously, no one's used the default cube. So press A to select all and X to delete. Now looking closely at this completely empty screen, you can see your tools on the left, your object coordinates on the right, and also on the right the hierarchy of your objects. Below that we have the properties panel, on the bottom it's your timeline, and finally at the top we have some function menus and Blender's workspaces. Every good project starts with references that are close to what you want to create. You can find them everywhere: Google, Pinterest, ArtStation, wherever you want. References are extremely important to give you an idea of how things work: lighting, poses, environment, characters, whatever. But here's a warning: drink from as many sources as possible for your project. Art is an amalgamation of everything we consume. Focusing too much on a single thing can cause your project to lean in one direction, and in the end, instead of reference, you may end up with a distorted copy of something else. But since, in this case, the reference you are seeing comes from the finished project itself, this doesn't apply here. Alright, the boring part is over. Now let's move on to the modeling practice. The first shortcut to learn here is Shift-A. It allows you to create several preset objects and shapes in Blender. We all start with a cube, so it's easier to reach the shape we want, in this case, a room. Pressing the mouse wheel lets you rotate your view to see the object from different angles. Shift mouse wheels allows you to move in 2D, vertically and horizontally, without rotating. Scrolling the wheel controls the zoom. Sometimes the camera's rotation axis may be misaligned with the object you are focused on. You can fix this by pressing Alt middle mouse button. Let's press Tab to enter edit mode and, as the name suggests, edit your cube. The A key allows you to select all the objects that are visible in the scene, but in edit mode, it will only select the vertices of the object in question. To edit your cube, we will use the most requested keys in Blender, G, R, and S. They represent the location of your object, its rotation, and its scale, respectively. I know it may sound obvious, but sometimes we forget simple things. So in the beginning, I use 3 words to memorize this: grab, rotation, scale. I know rotation and scale are intuitive, but G always got me. Alright, now let's scale the cube in Z-axis to create a floor. Whenever you are going to move, rotate, or scale something, you can constrain the action to a specific axis by pressing X, Y, or Z. For the wall, we can use loop cut through the tools on the right or by using the shortcut Ctrl-R. When we cut with the vertex selected, we'll move the lines to place them in the correct position. Now that we've marked where the wall will be, let's move on to the floor. What I'm going to do is mark where the floor's blocks would be. But since I'm thinking about making a raised floor, I will use Shift-D to duplicate the selected object. Use Z so it doesn't overlap, and then press P to separate it from my main object by clicking Selection. If an object is blocking the view of another and you don't want to move it, you can press Tab to go back to the object mode, select the object that is in the way, and press 8 to hide it. When you need it again, just press Alt 8. Another way to do this is to go to your object hierarchy and click the eye icon right next to it. Now we need to raise the walls. We'll return to our main object, go into Edit mode, press 3 to select the faces marked, and press E to extrude the object. This makes the object create a new connection vertex from the selected point. You can also find the extrusion tool in the side toolbar. About selection in Blender, in Edit mode there are 3 options to use. Normally, Blender's default selection method is vertices, but we also have edges and faces. They can be alternated using the keys 1, 2, and 3 at the top left of your keyboard. Alright, visually we have a room, but we need to give it some personality, so let's use everything we've learned so far. Ctrl-R to create another loop cut on the wall, Z to move it up, 3 for faces, Alt-click on the horizon edges so we select only what we want, E for extrusion. Instead of S, we'll use Alt-S to scale only on the X and Y axis. Let's press Tab to go back to object mode, Alt-8 to bring back our hidden object, click on it, Tab again, A to select everything, and E for extrusion. Now we lower the floor and scale it only on the X and Y axis. Every time you add an object or complete an action on it, you will see that small menu in the bottom left corner. When you click on it, a series of settings related to the action performed will appear, which helps ensure precision if necessary. But remember, the moment you click outside your object, the window closes. Now let's adjust the floor. While adjusting the floor, I noticed that the top part of our wall is misaligned. My bad, let's fix that. With that fixed, I started to feel that something was missing. A window. So let's do it. To make this, we'll need 2 new functions. The first one is in Set Faces, but before that, we'll select both sides of the wall so we can edit them at the same time. By pressing I, we create a new face division on the selected faces, and we will do this 3 times. Now we'll use the knife by pressing K, which will allow us to create 2 or more cut points on our object. And once again, we press X to constrain the axis. The knife only cuts objects that are in front of us, so we need to repeat the process manually on the back face. Now let's dissolve these edges below using X. Let's select the window's borders and the window itself. Press E for extrusion, S to scale, and Y to constrain the movement. We move it slightly inside the wall and then repeat the process, but this time only with the opening where the window will be. Now with the faces still selected, we press Ctrl E to open this menu and use Bridge Edge to easily connect the sides, thus creating a window opening. We click on these 2 faces down here, E for extrusion, S to scale, press Y, and pull them a bit outward from the wall. Now, before we finish the window, I need to clarify something. I imagine people who have been using Blender for a while might be wondering why I'm doing things in such a raw way, without relying on add-ons, modifier, or fancy shortcuts. That's because I believe that in order to understand why something is advantageous, You first need to understand the disadvantages other approaches bring. I could come here and finish the entire project in 5 minutes using all sorts of tricks, but then it would be the same as say, hey, copy this, instead of, hey, learn this. Beginners need to understand how the tools actually work. That way, they build a broader range of skills and can come up with their own solutions. Okay, let's build the window. Go back to Object Mode by pressing Tab, hide the room, create a new cube using Shift-A, then scale it on the Y and X axis. Select these two faces, press I, and after adjusting, press Ctrl-E and choose Bridge Edge. The next step is to use a new tool called Bevel. The Bevel tool is responsible for dividing your edges and vertices proportionally. So, create another cube, scale it, rotate a little bit on the X-axis, and in Edit mode, select these 4 edges and press Ctrl-B to bevel the object. You can configure the bevel however you like using the menu in the lower left corner. Then align it with the window and use Shift-D to duplicate it. Once you are happy with the result, select all the window objects and press Ctrl-J to join them. To place the window correctly, we need to make it easier to control, so we can use a small trick to do this. With the window selected, go into Edit mode and select these 2 vertices. Go ahead and right-click, then choose Subdivide. Now, move the window to align the new vertex with this origin point. This point is called the origin point. Every object has one. It's responsible for telling the engine where the central point of your object is. This affects how it scales or rotates in space. For example, when you rotate the object, it will rotate around this point. Now go to the top right corner and click on this arrow to open the Viewport Overlay menu. Go ahead and check this wireframe box. As you can see, Blender now displays the edges of your object. Alright, now let's align the window with the room. The next step is to duplicate the window using Shift-D. Then right-click and choose Mirror. Align it again. Select the other part of the window. Click on Transform Pivot Point at the top of your screen and choose Individual Origins. Now, when you press S to scale, Blender will scale each object based on its respective origin. Now rotate the part however you like. After that, switch the transform pivot point back to medium point. Now we are gonna make a table, so create another cube and scale it using S until it looks like a wooden border. Add a vertical loop cut and another horizontal one using Ctrl-R. Then select these edges and press Ctrl-B to bevel them. Adjust the edges if necessary. Now select the 4 small faces at the ends of the cube and press E to extrude them. And that's it! We have a simple coffee table. Let's do the coach to the scene as well. Create a new cube using Shift-A, using its top face as a guide, add 2 loop cuts, one horizontal and one vertical using Ctrl-R. Now select the vertical cut and press Ctrl-B to bevel it until the line gets close to the edge. Click on the horizontal cut and move it slightly backward. Select these 5 faces of the cube and lightly extrude them by pressing E. Now deselect these 2 faces and use Extrude again. Now walk around your object and make the necessary adjustment using G or S to make it more proportional. Maybe I'm recording this during the editing of the video because I forgot to mention that the button in top right corner is X-ray. When it's enabled, you can select both sides of your object without needing to keep rotating the view. Just maybe. With the base of the coat ready, all that's left is to add some details. Go back to Edit mode, press A to select all vertices and press Ctrl-B to bevel them. In the lower left menu, increase the number of segments. You can also go back to the viewport overlay and uncheck the wireframe box to see better. Right-click and choose Shader Smooth. This shading option tells Blender how lights interact with the object, make its surface appear smoother or flatter. Visually speaking, it's similar to anti-aliasing in games. Go to Object Mode, add another cube, and use S to scale it so it's aligned with the couch. Now we are going to press Ctrl A to apply the scale. When you apply something in Blender, you are basically telling it that this is now the default state of the object. In this case, we are making the current scale become the default scale. Now we are gonna back to Edit mode and press Ctrl B to bevel it slightly. Repeat the process, but this time bevel it a bit more. Use Shift-D to duplicate it and adjust the couch parts proportionally. Join all the couch parts using Ctrl J. Now place the decoration in the scene. We can adjust the scene's proportion by scaling it and moving objects around. Maybe a few picture frames on the wall would look nice. So create another cube, scale it, go into Edit mode, press I to inset the face, E to extrude and Y to constrain the axis. Place it on the wall and duplicate it a few times. Okay, now we have a scene. The next step is to add color to it, and we can do that in the shading workspace. In this video, I try to keep the shader very simple except for the wood shader. I'm not going to explain shader here because I'm planning to make a specific video about that, but I will cover the basics. Right below on the screen, we can see where the nodes that will compose our shader will be placed. On the left, we'll have the image editor, which basically displays your texture if you are using an image to generate it. And above that, you can access the files on your computer. What interests us the most here is our node area and the material properties, which can be accessed by clicking on the small red sphere on the right. Basically, everything we do in the node area will be represented in the material properties. In addition, this panel also shows some settings that change how Blender generates the shaders for that specific material. Looking at this before starting the shader, I think we can round this top edge a bit. Let's organize the object hierarchy and select the floor. To rename multiple objects with the same name, select them, press Ctrl F2, change the type to set name, check new, and type the name. Alright, let's begin with the wood shader. First, I will use nodes to build the base wood effect, so we can use it as a foundation when creating a color variation later. To do that, click on New, place your mouse over the node area and press Shift-A to open the Add menu. If you click on Search, you can find nodes by the name instead of browsing through each category. The nodes we all need are a bump node, 2 noise texture, a mapping node, and a texture coordinate. You can also press Shift-D to duplicate nodes. Almost all nodes have input and output, so we can connect them together. Before changing any values, let's connect them first. Connect the generate output of the texture coordinate node to the vector input of the mapping node. Then connect the vector output of the mapping node to the vector input of the first noise texture. Next, connect the vector output of the noise texture to the vector input of the second noise texture. Connect the vector output of the second noise texture to the height input of the bump node. Finally, connect the normal output of the bump node to the normal input of the principled BSDF. The principled BSDF is responsible for controlling the basic nuances of your shader. Things like color, metallic, roughness, refraction, alpha, and other components. The normal input is responsible for creating surface details so the material doesn't look completely flat. In other words, it adds perceived texture to your shader. The bump node controls how strong that effect will be. The higher the value, the deeper the surface detail appears. The noise texture, as the name suggests, generates a noise pattern. This allows you to create a wide variety of combinations, not only for surface depth but also for color, metallic values, roughness, and much more. The mapping node controls the overall transformation of your shader. You can scale it, rotate it, or even move it to find a better pattern. Finally, the texture coordinates node defines how Blender generates the texture coordinates. Automatically, from normals, from a UV map, or even from the object itself. Now let's adjust some values. Starting with the principled BSDF, change the base color to a dark tone almost black. In some cases, like this one, I don't recommend using a completely pure black, because black absorbs a lot of light. If you use it too much in dark tones, it can make your scene darker than necessary. Next, lower the roughness to 0.15, making the surface more reflected. When entering values, instead of typing 0.15, you can simply type 0.15. Blender will recognize it as a decimal number and automatically add the 0. Now let's move to the bump node. Start by setting both distance and filter width to 1. To make this easier, hover your mouse over the distance value and drag downward. Blender will give you the option to edit both values together. Now we need to lower the strength value. In this case, I like 0.1. In the first noise texture, change the scale to 2, detail to 18, roughness to 0.8, and distortion to 0.75. Go to the second noise texture and set scale to 0.4, detail to 1, roughness to 0.25, and that it is our wood pattern. Now go to our material and rename it to wood black, so it's easier to find later if needed. Click on the room and let's create a color variation based on our wood shader. To do that, go to the right panel and click on the arrow next to this sphere. To create a copy of the selected material, click on this stacked pages icon. This way, we avoid accidentally changing the shader on other objects. Alright, the only thing we want to modify is the color pattern. For that, we need to add a color ramp node. The color ramp creates a threshold between values represented by its color gradient. You can use it to control colors or adjust different types of patterns. In this case, we want to generate a color pattern that follows the structure of our wood shader. So connect the color ramp to the base color of the principled BSDF and then connect the noise texture to the color ramp. Since this will be a 3-color variation, we need to add another handle to the color ramp. So click on the plus icon on the gradient bar. Each handle represents a color. Click on it, then click the color bar below to choose your desired color. Finally, change the interpolation mode from linear to ease and adjust the handle of the color ramp to refine the pattern. For the walls, we will add another shader to our room by clicking on the plus icon on the far right of the screen next to the material slot. Now click on the small arrow next to new and add the wood material we just created. Then duplicate it by clicking again on the icon with the 2 overlapping pages. We are doing this because for the walls we need to create a wooden plank pattern, and starting from the previous shaders make the process much easier. To assign it properly, go back to Edit mode, select the faces where the material will be applied, and click Assign. Now we are edit the material to create the required pattern. For this, we are need to add a brick texture, a color ramp, a bump node, and a mix node. The mix node has 3 models: color, vector, and float, represented by the colors yellow, purple, and white. Make sure you are using the mix node set to color mode. First, connect the new color ramp to the vector input of the mix node, and connect the color ramp with the wood colors to input A. Click on input B and set it to black. The brick texture should have its color output connected to the new color ramp, the black and white one. Now connect the mapping node to the vector input of the brick texture. For this specific texture, instead of using generate, we will use the UV output from the texture coordinate node directly into the mapping node. Our first bump node, the one connected to the noise texture output, should have its normal output connected to the normal input of the new bump node. Then connect the new bump node to the normal input of the principled BSDF. Finally, connect the color output of the brick texture to the height input of the new bump node. Now we just need to adjust the values. In the mapping node, change the X scale to 0.1 and the Y scale to 3. In the brick texture, change the mortar color from black to white. Then set the scale to 3.6, mortar size to 0.005, mortar smooth to 1, and brick width to 0.8. Our new bump node should have its strength set to 0.575, while distance and filter width should both be set to 1. Now connect the mix node to the base color of the principled BSDF. As for the new color ramp, it works as a threshold between the color pattern as you adjust it. I will keep my settings, but feel free to experiment and find the configuration that works best for you. The wall pattern is probably not looking quite right. There may be some alignment issues or something similar. This happened because we are using the UV output from the texture coordinate node, which in turn relies on the object's UV map, so we need to adjust it. I want to go into detail about create a properly distributed UV map. Since the focus of the video is the shader, I will dive deeper into these nuances in another video. Now let's switch to the UV editing workspace. Once you are there, you can hover your mouse over the top workspace bar and scroll until you reach the end. You will see 4 spheres at the far right of the viewport. They represent how Blender display your project: wireframe, solid, material preview, and rendered. Click on Material Preview. Now that we can see the material, all that's left is to enter edit mode if you are not already in it. Select the entire object by pressing A and then press U to open the UV mapping menu. You will see several options to automatically reorganize your UV map. They don't always produce the best result, but they're very helpful, especially in simpler cases. Let's choose Smart UV Project. As you can see on the left side of the screen, your UV map distribution has completely changed. You can press Tab to return to Object Mode if you need a clear view, or toggle Show Overlay using the icon located above the viewport. Looking around the room, I need to adjust the shade a little bit more. So we can do that by changing some values in the mapping node scale or manually adjust some parts of the UV map. Back in the shader workspace, we can also select the couch and create a new material for it. This one will be white, but we shall lower the roughness to 0.25. To select the cushion more easily, first select the couch, then hover your mouse over a cushion and press L to select the entire mesh element. Do the same for the other cushion, and then assign a new darker material to them. For the coffee table, we can reuse the same wood shader we used earlier. For the picture frames on the wall, assign the same wood shader, duplicate it, and then adjust its color to a warmer tone, something like yellow. Select the center face and create a new material to apply it. In this new material, we will use some random image from the internet to create the photos. For that, we only need an image texture, a mapping node, and a texture coordinate node. Connect everything the usual way as we did in the previous shader, and then connect the color output of the image texture to the base color input of the principled BSDF. Now just click Open and choose an image from your computer. Apparently, the image I chose isn't being displayed correctly. This can be fixed by changing the texture coordinate output to UV, and then, after going back to the UV editing workspace, we can adjust the UV map so it displays properly. So, press U, choose Smart UV Project, select the face where the photo should appear, then center and scale it. Normally, the ideal setup is to avoid overlapping faces in your UV map, since that can cause issues when exporting textures. But since that isn't the focus of this project, we won't worry about that for now. Alright, one of the pictures frame is done. Now we'll use it as the base for the others. Select all the pictures frames, making sure the last one selected is the one we already edited. Then press Ctrl L to open the Link Transfer Data menu, choose Copy UV Maps, then open the menu again and choose Link Materials. All the frames are now identical. This allows us to change the photo in each one individually by selecting a frame. Now go back to Shading Workspace and duplicate only the image shader so you can replace the image inside the node. Alright, now we just need to add color to the window. First, let's change the Windows frame shader to the same one we used on the floor. Then select the Windows opening and switch it to the same shader we used on the top of our room. The same should be done for the windows. Looking at the wall, they are too shiny. Let's increase the roughness value to 0.75. With all the shaders ready, let's go back to the Layout tab to add the final touch to our scene. To keep things organized, create a new collection in the object hierarchy and name it Cinematic. In Viewport Shading, select the last option, Rendered. This view is responsible for showing how Blender will display your project in the final result. At this point, the screen is dark because there are no lights in your scene, so let's add some. Press Shift A, go to Light, and you will see 4 lighting options available. Point means the light is emitted from a specific point in a spherical shape, expanding equally in all directions. Sun is a type of global lighting that, as the name suggests, mimics the behavior of sunlight. Spot works like a spotlight. The light travels in a cone shape. And finally, we have Area, which produces lights from a flat surface. For this project, we are using Area Light. On the right side of your screen in the Properties panel, you will see a light bulb icon. That's where you'll find the light settings. Before adjusting it, let's position the light in the scene. Move the light near the center of the room, raise it to the top, and rotate it so it points downward. Now go to the light settings and increase the power to something around 10. Adjust it as needed, and then let's move on to the next light. Use Shift D to duplicate it and position the new light outside the room facing the window. Then increase its power to 100. And finally our scene is complete. Now we just need to render it or export it if necessary, and that's it. If you are creating a model for games or any other project where you need to export it to another engine, simply go to File in the top left corner of your screen and open the Export menu. There you will see the different files format Blender support for exporting your project. One important thing to mention is that each engine usually has its own axis orientation and scale system. This means that after importing, you may need to adjust the rotation and scale inside the new engine. I also recommend drawing as many objects as possible using Ctrl J before exporting, so your hierarchy in the new engine doesn't become completely messy. Still regarding export, the way which programs read the shader storage in your object is different from how Blender interprets it. So we will probably need to convert your shader into a texture image. To explain this quickly, let's go back to the Shading workspace and use any texture as an example. Create an image texture node, click New, and set the name and resolution of your image. Remember that it should be square so the UV map can read it correctly. After that, go to the Properties panel and click on the render icon represented by a small camera. Here's something very important. Blender has 3 render engines: Eve, Workbench, and Cycle. This means that each one Blender interprets your project differently, which directly impacts the final result. In addition, each engine has their own specific settings. Personally, I mostly use Eve and sometimes Cycles. That's because my modeling style, something more stylized, almost cartoon-like, often doesn't require lighting as realistic as what Cycles provides. Keep in mind that the closer your project is to realism, the longer it will take to render. With that explained, I need to point out that Blender only bakes texture using Cycle as the render engine, so even if your final result is meant for Eevee, if you want to export the texture from this project, you will need to switch to Cycle for baking. Alright, once you are in Cycle, scroll down to the Bake section. There you will see several options that influence how your texture will be generated. The first thing you should do is uncheck the direct and indirect lightings boxes. This means your final texture won't be affected by the lights in your scene, allowing the next engine where it's used to generate its own lighting influence without being affected by any pre-baked illumination. Under Bake type, you need to select the values that were modified in your shader. For example, if we changed the roughness, then we should select roughness as the Bake type. If we modify the normal, then we should choose normal. Anything you adjusted in the shader needs to be baked individually. And here comes the most annoying part. Blender doesn't natively support baking multiple shaders at once, or even multiple values from the same shader in a single operation. So we will need to repeat this entire process for each values of each shaders. For example, if we modify our base color, metallic and roughness, we would need to create a new image texture for each one and manually set up 3 separate baking operations, one after another. In short, it's a tedious process. Fortunately, Blender has several add-ons that significantly reduce this workload, some paid, some free. Honestly, I can't even remember the last time I baked a texture without using add-on. Still, it's something I don't quite understand why Blender has never really improved this workflow. One last and very important warning: when Blender finishes baking, your texture is not automatically saved. You must save it manually. Select the Image Texture node, go to the Image Editor on the left side of your screen, click on the 3 lines icon, open the Image menu, and choose Save As. Alright, now if you don't plan to export the project anywhere and just want to render it as a video or an image, you will need a camera. So once again, go back to Layouts tab, press Shift A and add a camera to the scene. To switch to the camera view, simply press 0 on your numeric keyboard. As you can see, the framing might not look very good at the first. The easiest way to fix this is, while still in camera view, to open the side panel where the transform options are located. If it's not visible, just press N while hovering your mouse over the view part to open it. Then go to the View tab. You will probably notice that I have more tabs than you do. Don't worry about that. Those extra tabs come from extension and aren't native to Blender. Inside the View tab, scroll down to View Locked and enable Camera to View. Now, whenever you are in camera view and move around the scene, the camera will follow exactly what you see. Once you find a frame you like, simply exit the camera view by pressing 0 again. I don't really know why, but I really like placing my camera in a isometric position, especially when working with a small environment. So that's the camera angle I will use for this scene. In the output properties, you have several video options that directly affect your final image. Things like resolution X and Y, the frame rate of your scene, and the frame range that determines where the animation starts and ends. But what we want to look at right now is the Output tab. Here you can choose the folder where the final result will be saved, whether you want to export a video or an image, which file format to use, and the color settings for the output. Overall, everything here is pretty self-explanatory. One important thing to remember, if your image needs alpha, mean transparency, it must be saved in RGBA, red, green, blue and alpha. You also need to enable the film transparency option in render properties. If you want to render a video, there's one more thing we can do to create a simple animation. First, we can change the frame rate to 30 FPS, which means that every 30 FPS in your timeline will equal 1 second of video. Next, press Shift-A and add an empty object of your choice. I'm going to add a plane axis. Move it so it stays above the scene. Now select everything except the camera by pressing A, make sure the last selected object is the empty, then press Ctrl P to parent the objects. From now on, whenever we move, rotate or scale the empty, all objects influenced by it will also change. This makes animating the scene much easier. Make sure the timeline cursor is on frame 1, that all rotations of the empty are reset to 0. Select the empty and press I to create a keyframe. Keyframes store the states of an object at the specific moment in the timeline. Whenever a transform is changed and made on the timeline, that state will remain the same until another keyframe is created. Blender will also automatically interpolate the movement between two keyframes. For example, if you insert a keyframe on frame 1, then go to frame 30, rotate the empty to -35 degrees on the z-axis and insert another keyframe, Blender won't change the position instantly. Instead, it will smoothly rotate the object between those frames. Now let's finish the animation. Go to frame 60 and press Alt-R on the empty to reset its rotation. Insert another keyframe. Then go to frame 90 and rotate the empty 35 degrees on the z-axis, inserting another keyframe. Finally, go to frame 120 and press Alt-R again to reset the rotation. Remember, every time you change a transform, you need to press I to insert a keyframe. To finish, in the timeline, change the end value from 250 to 120. Just a small correction, the animation looks much better if you double those values to 1, 60, 120, 180 and 240. Okay, now you just need to choose one of the 3 render engines, Eve, Workbench or Cycles, then go to the render menu in the upper left corner of the screen and choose whether you want to render an image or an animation. Also remember that the last 2 options in this menu, View Image and View Animation, render exactly what you are currently seeing in the Blender viewport. Well, we've reached the end of the video, and I sincerely hope that with everything I showed here you can now take your first steps in Blender. Starting something new is never easy, but just like me, if you made it this far, I ask you not to stop trying. So subscribe to the channel, leave a like and share this video with as many people as you can. Just subscribing already helps the channel a lot. Don't miss the next video. See you next time!